I'll be honest with you, the whole thing started on a Sunday morning that felt way too peaceful for what eventually went down. I was in my backyard in a little town called Ridgewood Hollow, population, mostly retirees, dog walkers, and folks who treat lawn height like a sacred ritual. My yard was my sanctuary, a place I protected a little more fiercely than most people understood, mostly because the rest of my life wasn't exactly tranquil. When your job involves things like clearance levels and briefings with titles that sound intentionally vague, you hang on to your quiet places. That morning the sun was filtering through the maple tree I planted the day I bought the house. And for a moment, I really believed the world was gentle. Coffee sweating on the metal table, an old novel in my lap, sneakers kicked off. Nothing extraordinary, nothing loud, nothing complicated. And then, just like that, peace got tackled by the universe. I noticed first that one of the branches hanging near the fence had been chopped off. Not trimmed or pruned, but hacked, like someone was mad at it. And I knew exactly who lived on the other side of that fence, which meant I also knew this wasn't an accident. I let it slide, told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe somebody had a bad day or a dull pair of shears. But then I heard the gravel crunch. I looked up and saw her. Not Karen. That's not her real name. But trust me, if the role existed as a job description, she would have been employee of the century. Her actual name was Gretchen Lyle. Platinum bob, peach-colored jogging set, sunglasses big enough to double as riot shields. She walked like she had an audience even when nobody else was around. And most importantly, she was the self-appointed deputy overlord of the Ridgewood Hollow Homeowners Association. I wasn't a member of the HOA. My property wasn't within their boundary lines. My deed literally said exempt. But that tiny little detail had never once stopped Gretchen from acting like the neighborhood sheriff, and I was a stray she needed to corral. She marched right up to the fence like she'd been rehearsing all morning. No greeting, no small talk, just pure, undiluted authority. "You're not allowed back here," she snapped. I blinked. "Back where?" "In that yard," she said, pointing at my grass as if she were claiming land for a new colony. "This is common use HOA recreation space. No unauthorized individuals allowed. You need to leave." I leaned back in my chair, trying not to laugh. "I live here," I told her. She shook her head like I was a toddler lying about who drew on the wall. "No, the man who owns this house works for the government or something. I've seen the vehicles. You are not him. So either you're squatting or you're running some kind of operation. And either way, I'm not letting you compromise the neighborhood." I closed my book, very calmly, because the old me, the me before I learned how to survive rooms full of people who wanted to test my temper, would have stood up and corrected her with unnecessary aggression. Now I choose my battles. I stay still. I breathe. I let people underestimate me. I said, "Ma'am, I am indeed the man who owns this house." "Yeah," she scoffed, "and I'm the Queen of Ohio." Before I could try again, she whipped out her phone. "I'm calling the HOA Compliance Patrol. You have 5 seconds to leave before they escort you out." "Escort me from my own property?" I asked. "Yes." "Okay," I said, "go ahead." She started dialing. And from down the street came the unmistakable whirring of a golf cart engine, pushed way harder than it was meant to be pushed. Around the corner came a tanned, shirtless man with a mullet and a neon vest, gripping the wheel like he was in a race he didn't sign up for. His name was Rick. He was Gretchen's second-in-command, mostly because no one else wanted the job. He screeched to a stop, nearly hitting her decorative hedges. Jumped out, raised a megaphone. "Sir," he blared, "you are trespassing on HOA property. Vacate immediately or face compliant action under Ridgewood Statute 7.4 subsection B-trespass." I said, "You just made that up." He hesitated. "It's interpretive law." At that point I knew this wasn't going to resolve with logic. I also knew that the last thing I needed was a shouting match recorded on one of Gretchen's community rumor threads. So I did the only reasonable thing. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Gretchen's eyes narrowed. "Who are you calling?" "Fake cops." I didn't answer. The call clicked. "Calder here," a voice said. "Hey, Calder," I said. "It's Brooks. You and the team anywhere nearby?" 2 minutes out, he replied. "Everything all right?" "Yeah. Just an overzealous neighborhood complication." "Understood. We'll swing by." I hung up. Gretchen smirked. "Nice try. You can't scare me with your little actor friends." 2 minutes later, a quiet black SUV rolled into view. Not flashy, not dramatic, but unmistakably official. The kind of car nobody in Ridgewood Hollow had ever seen unless they'd driven past a federal building. Two agents stepped out, wearing suits in weather that absolutely did not call for suits. Agent Calder and Agent Ruiz. Calm, focused, efficient. They approached the fence. Calder nodded to me. "Everything all right, Brooks?" Before I could answer, Gretchen inserted herself. "Excuse me, you cannot park federal-looking vehicles on HOA land. This is a private community." Calder looked at her through sunglasses that held the emotional temperature of a marble countertop. "Ma'am, please step away from this property line. This land belongs to the HOA," she insisted. "This property," he replied, pointing at my yard, "belongs to him." He pointed at me. "This residence is under federal advisement and monitored accordingly. You are interfering with secure operations." Rick dropped the megaphone. Gretchen's jaw dropped so low I thought she might inhale a bug. "That is fake," she shouted. "You are all fake. Etsy sells badges like that. I saw a documentary." Calder didn't blink. "Dispatch, this is Calder," he said into his mic, civilian on site refusing to acknowledge jurisdiction. "Requesting verification unit." Less than a minute later, a second SUV pulled up. This one had a clearly marked seal. Everyone who could peek through a window was peeking. Rick ran. I mean, he didn't walk, didn't jog, didn't attempt dignity. He sprinted to the golf cart, hopped in, and fled toward the cul-de-sac like he was escaping a wildfire. Gretchen stayed rooted, vibrating with disbelief and outrage. "This is tyranny," she hissed. "We will not stand for this. I am calling an emergency meeting. You will be removed from this neighborhood." Calder leaned toward me and murmured, "Do you want us to document this for interference?" I sighed. Might as well. She's not stopping anytime soon. And she didn't. Not even close. The next afternoon, Gretchen gathered about 15 neighbors in her backyard. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee and wondering if this was what it felt like to be the villain in someone else's movie. She had flyers, a megaphone, slideshow printouts accusing me of everything from spying to frequency tampering. She claimed my garden shed was a hub for encrypted transmissions. She said the agents were crisis actors. Someone brought a folding table of pastries. It felt like a conspiracy-themed bake sale. At one point, she shouted, "He must be removed before he compromises our way of life." I motioned for immediate community-led eviction. Two hands went up. One belonged to a woman knitting. The other was a teenager who raised his hand only when he realized she wasn't taking donut requests. "The motion passes unanimously," she declared. From behind my fence, Calder stepped forward holding a tablet. "Ms. Lyle, this is recorded surveillance of you trespassing onto his private property on multiple occasions. You are advised to cease all unauthorized entry and harassment." She stared at the footage. Her face twitched in 5 different directions. "Deep fake," she muttered. "Government made." Someone whispered, "Gretchen, that looks like your flamingo pattern visor." She ignored them and announced she would be calling the press. And the next morning, she did. A local news van rolled up. A young reporter, probably fresh out of journalism school, followed her to the fence while she narrated my imaginary crimes. I watched from my living room window as Calder stepped out onto the porch and said, "Sir, you may film from public property. Stepping onto this lawn will result in detainment per Title 18, Section 1382. The reporter backed up so fast he tripped. The cameraman didn't wait for clarification. They left. Gretchen screamed at the air. Then she began live streaming to an audience of people typing aggressively from their couches. That evening, Calder approached me in the living room. "Brooks," he said quietly, "HQ recommends extraction until visibility decreases. Her escalating behavior is unpredictable. Relocation protocol. I had experienced it before. You pack light, leave discreetly, and let the storm burn itself out." I agreed. Before sunrise, I was gone. But while I was gone, something happened that shifted everything. The team secured my property with new barriers and a motion-triggered surveillance pole. It wasn't dramatic, just necessary. At dawn, Gretchen marched outside in her bathrobe, live streaming as usual, pacing like a general reviewing a battlefield. "They think they can intimidate us with signs," she declared. "This is our land. Watch as I reclaim it." She reached her hand across the property line and slapped her palm on the federal camera pole like she was tagging home base. The silent alarm triggered. 20 minutes later, federal officers arrived in a marked cruiser. They approached her calmly. "Ma'am, you have trespassed on federally protected private property. Place your hands behind your back." She refused, screamed, fought, declared herself a patriot. Her phone fell mid-live stream, capturing everything from the ground. Her yelling, the officers reading her rights, the arrest. By noon, her video had gone viral across the county. By dinner, meme pages had already remixed it with dramatic soundtracks. And by the next morning, Ridgewood Hollow had collectively realized they'd followed the wrong general into battle. When I returned home 2 days later, the entire mood of the neighborhood had shifted. People who once avoided eye contact now brought baked goods. Rick vanished entirely. Even the HOA president dropped off a handwritten apology letter that sounded a lot like someone trying to avoid liability. But fate wasn't done with Gretchen. One Saturday afternoon, while I was grilling with Calder and Ruiz, a quiet government sedan pulled into her driveway. 2 plainclothes investigators got out holding binders. They spoke to her at the door. She opened a packet they handed her, went pale, and shut the door immediately. Calder raised an eyebrow. That wasn't us. The next day, the rumors confirmed it. IRS, Financial Crimes Division, investigating massive misappropriation of HOA funds. Community landscaping expenses that matched her pool renovation. Security signage that matched her backyard upgrades. Emergency preparedness grants spent at luxury retailers. The HOA held a real vote this time. Unanimous removal. Federal charges pending. Weeks later, Gretchen moved out quietly. No speeches. No recordings. Just a moving truck and a pair of sunglasses hiding her defeat. The house was bought by a retired couple named the Moores, who introduced themselves with banana bread and zero conspiracy theories. The neighborhood healed. But here's the part that sticks with me. The part that keeps the story alive when people whisper it during block parties or joke about it during Halloween gatherings. The same bench where my Sunday morning started now has a plaque. A simple line carved into the stone. He stayed. Every time I sit on it, I think about how quickly people judge, how fast they choose sides without knowing the story, how confidence gets mistaken for authority and silence gets mistaken for weakness, and sometimes how justice comes around wearing a plain suit and holding a binder. Maybe you've seen something like this. Maybe you've lived through someone trying to steamroll you with fake authority or loud confidence. So tell me in the comments, where's the line between protecting a community and controlling it? And have you ever seen someone abuse power until it finally caught up with them?